Welcome to WID, helping millions understand the money behind America's biggest stories, because every dollar has a story. And today, we're decoding this one. So in this explainer, we're going to look really closely at a kind of silent trap that's catching households all across the country. And we'll do it by breaking down the data, the psychology, and the very real-world impact.
Picture a deeply familiar scenario. We've got a hardworking American. They earn a decent salary, they pay their bills on time, and they actively avoid luxury spending. No extravagant vacations, no designer clothes. Yet somehow, they're still carrying thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Every single month, they diligently make their payment, and every single month, the balance barely even budges. Honestly, it feels like running on a treadmill that just keeps speeding up. Which brings us to a really core question here. How can someone do everything right and still fall behind? Look, the stress of logging into a checking account or that sheer stomach-dropping fear of opening a credit card statement, that is a heavy, invisible burden carried by professionals, families, renters, and homeowners alike. But high interest rates aren't actually the biggest reason many Americans remain trapped in debt. There's a much larger systemic collision happening right now.
Section 1. The credit card debt explosion.
If you're feeling the squeeze right now, you need to know immediately that you are absolutely not alone. The shame so many people feel around debt usually comes from this illusion that it's an isolated personal failure. But the data? It tells a completely different story. We are looking at record-breaking national credit card debt totals, well over $1 trillion. Now, when we see numbers in the trillions, it's so easy for our eyes to just glaze over. But let's translate that massive number into everyday reality. That $1 trillion figure represents millions of ordinary people using debt not to get ahead, but simply to survive. It literally represents the collective anxiety of the modern middle class, just trying to bridge the gap between their paychecks and the harsh realities of modern life.
The whole landscape of modern finance has drastically shifted. Just look at the historical debt-to-income ratios over the last 30 years. There is a totally stark difference between earlier decades and today. The modern worker is facing an unprecedented financial squeeze. Incomes have simply not kept pace with a reliance on debt. It proves, mathematically, that falling behind today isn't necessarily about a lack of discipline. Actually, it's about navigating a completely changed economic environment.
Section 2. How the trap actually works.
To really understand how we got here, we've got to look past those shiny banking commercials and dive right into the math. Let's decode how credit cards actually function in reality. When you make a minimum payment, look at how the money is divided out. You have this massive chunk going entirely to interest, and then this tiny, almost microscopic sliver in actually reducing your principal balance. It's the brutal mathematical reality of compound interest working against you. Frankly, minimum payments can be so deceptive they deserve their own warning label. You feel like you're taking action, but the whole structure is specifically designed to keep that balance alive.
There's a really stark contrast between intention and reality here. A credit card is usually intended to act as a temporary emergency safety net, right? A popped tire, an unexpected medical bill, but the reality often becomes a revolving long-term debt sentence. That gap between intention and reality is exactly where the trap snaps shut. However, the most dangerous feature of credit cards isn't what most people think. It isn't just the math. It's what happens when that math meets our modern economy.
Section 3. The cost of living crisis.
We really need to move far beyond those, frankly, insulting, just stop buying coffee cliches. I mean, come on. Over recent years, housing costs surged, grocery bills spiked, and healthcare totally outpaced our relatively stagnant wages. These macro forces are literally pushing Americans to use credit just to cover the basics. So many people plan to use their credit card for one single emergency. Then, inflation introduced itself. And suddenly, that credit card wasn't for emergencies anymore, it was for Tuesday's groceries.
Section 4. The psychology of debt.
Now, right alongside those heavy economic pressures, there is an intense emotional toll. The mental burden of managing this constant gap between income and expenses actually changes consumer behavior. Our modern buy now, pay later culture actively preaches instant gratification. And when people are stressed out about money, it really often triggers emotional or stress spending as a coping mechanism. The temptation is everywhere. In fact, some people swipe their credit cards so confidently you'd think it was paying them. But look, it's super important to view this without judgment. These are modern traps, designed by absolute experts to be completely frictionless.
Section 5. Who benefits from credit card debt?
So if everyday people are struggling so much, who's actually winning? If we look at the financial incentives, and we don't need any conspiracy theories here, the math is straightforward. Banks and payment networks are mathematically incentivized to keep revolving balances active. Why? Because that is a primary driver of the revenue through interest and swipe fees. The consumer's incentive is to pay it off, sure, but the institutional structure is optimized to encourage prolonged borrowing. It's just a fundamental misalignment of goals.
Section 6. The housing connection.
This debt doesn't just exist in a vacuum. The invisible burden hiding in your wallet directly impacts the highly visible roof over your head. Surging credit card balances drastically affect your debt-to-income ratio, which creates massive hurdles for mortgage approvals. It diminishes those homeownership dreams and traps renters in this endless cycle where they just can't save a down payment because all their extra cash is being eaten alive by compound interest. This complete loss of financial flexibility means people are stuck exactly where they are.
Section 7. 3 possible futures.
If we zoom out and look at the trajectory of these record-breaking balances, we can map out 3 potential paths for the American economy. In an optimistic scenario, wage growth finally outpaces inflation and consumers naturally deleverage. In a neutral scenario, we see continued stagnation, basically people just treading water, making minimum payments indefinitely. And the pessimistic view? Well, that's a full-blown debt crisis where defaults ripple through the whole economy. But while these are the big macro trends, the most important future is the one you can control personally.
Section 8. Finding your way out.
If you recognize yourself in this explainer, it's time to pivot to some practical possibilities. There are things you can actually do to regain agency over your financial life. Step 1 is a completely shame-free spending audit, literally just tracking where the money goes without judging yourself. Step 2 involves debt prioritization strategies, things like the avalanche or snowball methods, so you can strategically attack balances rather than just throwing random money at minimums. And Step 3? Just negotiating interest rates. A simple phone call to your card issuer to ask for a lower rate often yields totally surprising results.
Ultimately, it's about shifting your mindset and building broader financial tools. It's about cultivating budget awareness, building even a tiny emergency fund to prevent that next unexpected expense from landing on a card, exploring income improvement ideas, and diving into free financial literacy resources. Hope still exists, guys. Financial recovery is entirely possible when you map out a deliberate, step-by-step path.
It all really comes down to one incredibly powerful truth. Financial recovery begins the exact moment we replace shame with strategy. Debt is just a mathematical problem exacerbated by a tough economy. It is absolutely not a reflection of your worth as a person. When you drop the shame, you free up all that mental energy you need to execute a strategy.
Which leaves us with one final thought to consider. What will the story of your next dollar be? Will it go toward the silent trap? Or will it go toward building your own financial foundation? Remember, every dollar has a story. And now you know this one. See you in the next Decode.